There is a political battle raging in America over something that should be completely uncontroversial, requiring ID to vote. Democrats call voter ID laws racist. They claim these laws suppressed minority votes. They say requiring identification to cast a ballot is modern day Jim Crow. They fight voter ID requirements with every tool they have: lawsuits, legislative battles, media campaigns, public pressure. Meanwhile, Republicans support voter ID. They say it's common sense that election integrity requires knowing who's voting, that requiring ID isn't racist, it's responsible. So who's right? Is voter ID racist suppression or common sense security? Is it disenfranchisement or protection against fraud? Is it Jim Crow or election integrity? The answer is obvious once you cut through the propaganda. Voter ID is common sense. It's not racist. It's not suppression. It's basic election security that every functioning democracy requires. Today, we're going to examine what voter ID laws actually are, the history of voting requirements in America, why Democrats oppose voter ID so viciously, why their arguments are complete nonsense, how voter ID works in practice, and what the data shows, why election integrity matters for democracy, and what this fight is really about. This is going to expose Democratic lies. We're going to dismantle every argument against voter ID. We're going to show that opposition to voter ID isn't about protecting voters. It's about enabling fraud. Let's get into it.
Courage, compassion, faith, freedom, truth. Welcome to Courage in the Darkness with your host, Philip Roberts. It's time to awaken America.
Let me start with what voter ID laws actually require, because Democrats deliberately misrepresent this. Voter ID laws require voters to present identification before casting a ballot. That's it. Show ID, proving who you are, who you claim to be, and that you're eligible to vote in that jurisdiction. Different states have different specifics. Some require photo ID, some accept non-photo ID. Some are strict. No ID means no vote. Some are non-strict. No ID means provisional ballot that's verified later. But the basic principle is the same. Prove your identity before voting. Most voter ID laws accept multiple forms of identification: driver's license, state ID card, passport, military ID, tribal ID, student ID from state universities, concealed carry permits, government employee ID. Some states accept non-photo IDs like utility bills, bank statements, or government checks showing name and address. Many states provide free ID specifically for voting purposes. If you don't have ID, the state will give you one at no cost. The requirements aren't onerous. They're not designed to exclude people. They're designed to verify identity. Voter ID prevents several types of fraud: impersonation fraud, someone voting as someone else, dead people voting, non-citizens voting, people voting multiple times in different locations, people voting in wrong jurisdictions. It also increases public confidence in elections. When voters know ID is required, they trust results more. They believe Their legitimate vote isn't being canceled by fraudulent votes. 36 states have voter ID laws. 35 require documentation at polls, some strict, some non-strict, some photo, some non-photo. But the majority of states require some form of ID. This isn't fringe policy, it's mainstream election security practiced by most states, including many with Democratic governors and legislators. Voter ID isn't uniquely American or uniquely Republican. Most democracies worldwide require voter ID. Canada requires ID, Mexico requires photo ID with biometric data. Most European countries require ID. India, largest democracy on earth, requires ID. Even many African and South American democracies require ID. The idea that voter ID is racist or suppressive is uniquely American leftist propaganda. The rest of the world understands it's common sense. Let me be clear about what voter ID doesn't do, because Democrats make false claims. It doesn't prevent anyone eligible from voting. Every eligible voter can get ID. Most already have ID. Those who don't can get free IDs. It doesn't target minorities. ID requirements apply equally to everyone, regardless of race. Black voters, white voters, green voters, yellow voters, red voters, Hispanic voters, everyone shows IDs. It doesn't solve every election problem. Voter ID addresses impersonation fraud and identity verification. It doesn't prevent mail-in ballot fraud or ballot harvesting or the other issues. But that doesn't mean it's not valuable. It's one component of election security, not a complete solution. Now, let me provide historical context, because Democrats act like voter ID is unprecedented suppression. It's not. The founders didn't establish universal suffrage. Voting was limited to property owning men. The reasoning was that voters should have stake in society and independence from others' influence. This wasn't about race initially. It was about ensuring voters were invested in good governance. Poor whites couldn't vote either. Obviously, this was flawed and unjust. But the point is that voting requirements existed from the beginning. Voting was never a completely unrestricted right. Voting rights expanded throughout American history. 1820s to the 1840s, property requirements eliminated. All white men could vote regardless of property ownership. 15th Amendment, 1870, prohibited denying vote based on race. Black men gained voting rights, at least in theory. The 19th Amendment in 1920, women gained voting rights. The 26th Amendment in 1971, voting age lowered from 21 to 18. Each expansion was progress, but even as we expanded who could vote, we maintained requirements for how voting works. After Reconstruction, Southern Democrats implemented laws specifically designed to prevent black people from voting. Poll taxes required payment to vote. This disenfranchised poor people, especially black citizens. Literacy tests required reading and interpreting complex legal documents, applied discriminatorily, with whites given easy questions and black giving impossible ones. Grandfather clauses exempted people whose grandfathers voted from literacy tests. Since black people's fathers were enslaved and couldn't vote, this excluded them, well, including whites. Violence and intimidation. The KKK and other Democrats used terror to prevent black voting. These laws were explicitly designed for racial discrimination. They were applied unequally. They were combined with violence. They were actual voter suppression. The civil rights movement fought these discriminatory laws. The 24th Amendment in 1964 eliminated poll taxes. Voting Rights Act in 1965 banned literacy tests and other discriminatory practices, required federal approving for voting law changes in jurisdictions with history of discrimination. These reforms were necessary and righteous. They eliminated laws designed to suppress black votes. But notice what they didn't do? They didn't eliminate all voting requirements. They eliminated discriminatory requirements. Big difference. Today, we still have various voting requirements. Registration. You gotta register before voting. This verifies eligibility and prevents people from voting multiple times. Age requirements, you gotta be 18. Nobody claims this is suppression. Citizenship, you gotta be an American citizen. Non-citizens can't vote in federal elections, even though Democrats think that they can. Residency, you must vote in jurisdictions where you live. You can't vote in multiple states. The felon restrictions. Many states prohibit felons from voting, at least while they're incarcerated. These requirements are accepted as reasonable. They ensure election integrity without preventing eligible voters from participating. Voter ID fits this same category. It's a reasonable requirement that ensures integrity without preventing legitimate voting. Democrats compare voter ID to Jim Crow laws. This is offensive and historically illiterate. Jim Crow laws were designed for discrimination. They were applied unequally. They were combined with violence and intimidation. They explicitly targeted black people. Voter ID laws applied equally to everyone. They're not designed for discrimination. They're not combined with intimidation. They're designed for election security. Comparing voter ID to Jim Crow is like comparing driver's licenses to slavery. It's absurd propaganda designed to manipulate emotions rather than engage facts. Now let me explain why the Democrats fight voter ID so viciously. Because it's not about protecting voters. It's about enabling fraud and maintaining power. Democrats claim they oppose voter ID because it suppresses minority votes. Minorities are less likely to have ID, so requiring ID prevents them from voting. It's a solution in search of a problem. In-person voter fraud is extremely rare, so voter ID is unnecessary. It creates barriers to voting. Getting ID requires time, money, documentation that some people lack. It's modern Jim Crow designed to reduce Democratic votes. These sound somewhat reasonable on surface, but every single one is wrong. The real reasons. Democrats oppose voter ID for 3 actual reasons. Number 1, it prevents fraud that benefits Democrats. This is the main reason. Democrats benefit from loose election security. When ID isn't required, fraud is easier, and that fraud helps Democrats. Consider what becomes possible without voter ID. Non-citizens voting, illegal immigrants voting for Democrats who promise amnesty and benefits, dead people voting, deceased people remaining on the polls and someone voting in their name, double voting, people voting in multiple jurisdictions where they have addresses, impersonation, someone voting as someone else who's unlikely to show up, ballot harvesting, collecting ballots from people who didn't request them and filling them out or assisting with partisan suggestions. All of this becomes harder with voter ID. You can't vote as someone else if you have to show that person's ID. You can't vote as a dead person if you have to present their valid ID. Non-citizens can't vote if citizenship is verified through ID. Democrats benefit from this fraud. Urban Democrat machines have a long history of election manipulation. Chicago, Philly, Detroit, cities with weak election security and suspicious vote counts. Voter ID threatens this system. That's why Democrats oppose it so viciously. Number two, it reduces dependence and increases voter competence. Democrats prefer voters who are dependent, uninformed, and easily manipulated. These voters support Democrat policies promising government assistance. Think about who doesn't have ID. People so disconnected from society that they haven't obtained basic identification. People who don't work, don't drive, don't travel, don't open bank accounts, don't engage with social institutions. These are often people living on government assistance. People Democrats have made dependent. People who vote Democrat because they need government benefits. If you require these people to get ID, to engage with the system enough to obtain identification, you're requiring minimal competence and connection to society. They might start working, start participating normally, start becoming independent. And independent people don't vote Democrat. They don't need government. They resent taxes funding others. They value freedom over security. Democrats need dependent voters. Voter ID threatens that by requiring minimal civic participation. Number three, it admits election security is important. If Democrats admit voter ID is reasonable security measure, they have to admit election security matters. This opens the door to other security measures Democrats oppose. Cleaning voter rolls of dead people and people who moved, requiring citizenship verification, eliminating ballot harvesting, restricting mail voting, requiring signature verification. All of these improve election integrity. All of these make fraud harder. All of these hurt Democrats who benefit from weak security. Voter ID is the front line. If Republicans win on voter ID, they'll push for more security measures. Democrats must hold the line on voter ID to prevent further reforms. Democrats have calculated that loose election security benefits them electorally. Their voting base includes urban poor, often lacking ID, easy to manipulate with ballot harvesting and assistance. Non-citizens, millions of illegal immigrants in blue states who might vote illegally if verification is weak. Low information voters, people who don't follow politics but can be harvested during elections with ballot collection. This voting base requires weak security to maximize turnout, including illegitimate turnout. Meanwhile, Republican voters are typically employed, competent, engaged citizens who already have ID and follow election rules. Strengthening security doesn't hurt Republican turnout, but does hurt Democrat fraud. Democrats understand this. That's why they fight voter ID, despite it being common sense supported by the vast majority of Americans, including minorities. Now, let me dismantle every argument Democrats make against voter ID because they're all lies and manipulation. Voter ID is racist. This is the primary claim that requiring ID discriminates against minorities who are less likely to have ID. This argument is racist. It assumes that Black and Hispanic people are too incompetent to obtain ID, that they can't figure out how to go to the DMV and get identification, that they're helpless and need Democrats to protect them from the burden of showing ID. That's insulting and false. Black and Hispanic people are perfectly capable of getting IDs. They have ID. They use ID for everything: employment, banking, travel, buying alcohol, entering government buildings. Studies show that over 95% of adults have ID regardless of race. The racial gap in ID possession is minimal, and those without ID can get free ID from the state. The claim that minorities can't get ID is based on the racist assumption that they're less capable than whites. It's Democrats projecting their racism. Here's a good one. In-person fraud is rare. Democrats claim in-person impersonation fraud, which voter ID prevents, is extremely rare. They cite studies showing few prosecutions. This is circular reasoning. Of course, fraud is hard to detect and prosecute when there's no ID requirement. How do you catch someone voting as someone else if you don't verify identity? It's like saying bank robbery is rare because cameras and securities aren't catching many robberies, so we should remove cameras and security. The security itself prevents the crime. Moreover, absence of prosecution doesn't prove absence of fraud. It proves absence of detection. Without voter ID, most fraud is undetectable. We know fraud occurs. There are documented cases of non-citizens voting, dead people voting multiple times. Every election produces examples. The question is, how much undetected fraud exists? Even if fraud is rare, preventing it is worthwhile. We require ID for so many things to prevent rare abuses. You got to show ID to buy cold medicine, even though few people manufacture meth. Prevention is more important than frequency. Voter ID creates barriers, they say. Democrats claim getting ID is difficult for some people. Costs money, requires documentation, takes time, creates barriers to voting. First, most states provide free ID for voting purposes. No cost barrier. Second, obtaining ID requires minimal effort. One trip to the DMV with your birth certificate or other documents. If someone can't manage this minimal task, should they be voting? Voting requires basic civic competence. Third, we accept ID requirements for countless other activities: buying alcohol, buying cigarettes, opening bank accounts, getting a job, renting an apartment, flying, entering federal buildings, picking up prescription medication, getting welfare benefits. Nobody claims these ID requirements are discriminatory barriers. Why? Because obtaining ID is normal, minimal requirement of participating in society. If you can show ID to collect a welfare check, you can show ID to vote. If you can show ID to buy beer, you can show ID to cast a ballot. The barrier argument is absolutely absurd. It assumes voters are helpless invalids who can't accomplish basic tasks. This is one of my favorites. It suppresses turnout. Democrats claim voter ID reduces turnout, especially among minorities. The data proves otherwise. Studies of states that implemented voter ID show no decrease in turnout. Minority turnout doesn't decline. In some cases, it actually increases. Georgia implemented voter ID. Black turnout increased. Indiana implemented voter ID. No turnout decline. Study after study shows no suppression effect. This makes sense because eligible voters already have ID. Getting ID isn't difficult, and voter ID is popular, including among minorities. So it may actually increase confidence and turnout. The suppression claim is empirically false. It's fear-mongering, not supported by data. Let's talk about it's unnecessary. Fraud doesn't happen. The Democrats claim voter ID is solution in search of problem. Fraud is so rare, it's not worth addressing. This is like saying we shouldn't lock our doors because burglaries are rare. Prevention isn't contingent on high crime rates. It's about basic security. Election integrity matters enormously. Even small amounts of fraud can swing close elections. Even the perception of fraud undermines democracy. Ensuring elections are secure and perceived as secure is worthwhile, regardless of fraud frequency. Moreover, we don't actually know how much fraud occurs precisely because weak security makes detection impossible. The absence of detected fraud with weak security doesn't prove fraud isn't occurring. Every other country requires voter ID. Are they all wrong? Or are Democrats the only ones who can't see the obvious need for election security? How about we need to make voting easier? Democrats frame opposition to voter ID as part of a broader goal, making voting as easy as possible, reducing barriers, maximizing participation. This sounds great, but it's wrong. Voting shouldn't be as easy as possible. It should be as secure as necessary while being reasonably accessible to eligible voters. Democracy requires informed, engaged citizens making deliberate choices. If someone can't manage minimal requirements like registering and showing ID, they probably aren't informed and engaged. We don't need maximum turnout. We need quality turnout. Eligible voters who are informed and intentional about voting. Loose security that enables fraud doesn't serve democracy. Voter ID is partisan. Democrats claim Republicans push voter ID to suppress Democratic votes. It's partisan power grab, not good policy. This is projection. Democrats oppose voter ID to enable fraud that helps them. They're the ones being partisan. Voter ID has bipartisan support among voters. Polls consistently show 70 to 80% of Americans support voter ID, including the majority of Democrats and a large majority of independents and minorities. It's not partisan among voters. It's only partisan among politicians. Democrat politicians oppose voter ID. Democrat voters support it. This proves it's not genuinely about protecting voters. It's about protecting Democrat political advantages. How about it's like Jim Crow? This is the most offensive claim that they make. That voter ID is modern Jim Crow designed to prevent black people from voting. This is historically illiterate and morally obscene. Jim Crow laws were explicitly designed for racial discrimination. They were applied unequally. They were combined with violence, intimidation, terrorism. Voter ID applies equally to everyone regardless of race. It's designed for election security, not discrimination. Nobody is being threatened or intimidated. Comparing voter ID to Jim Crow trivializes actual oppression. It's manipulative race baiting designed to shut down legitimate debate. Black people in America today are not oppressed by being asked to show ID to vote. They show ID for dozens of activities. Acting like showing ID to vote is equivalent to literacy tests and poll taxes is insulting to actual civil rights struggles. Let me show you what actually happens when states implement voter ID, because the data contradicts every Democratic claim. The case study, Georgia implemented strict voter ID law in 2005. Democrats predicted disaster. They claimed black turnout would collapse, that Georgia was returning to Jim Crow. What actually happened? Black turnout increased. In 2006 midterms, after implementation, black turnout rose. In 2008 presidential election, black turnout increased dramatically, higher than white turnout. In 2020, Georgia had record turnout, including record black turnout, all while maintaining strict voter ID. The predicted suppression never happened. Georgia proves voter ID doesn't prevent legitimate voting. Indiana implemented photo ID requirement in 2005. Democrats sued, claiming it was unconstitutional. Case went to Supreme Court. Supreme Court upheld Indiana's law 6-3 in 2008. Even liberal justices acknowledged that preventing fraud and ensuring election integrity were legitimate state interests. What happened after implementation? No decrease in turnout, no racial disparities in turnout. Eligible voters continued voting. The law worked as intended, increasing security without preventing legitimate voting. State after state that implemented voter ID shows the same pattern. No turnout decrease, no racial disparities in turnout, no mass disenfranchisement. Increased public confidence in elections. Texas, Tennessee, Arizona, Wisconsin, Virginia. Every state contradicts Democratic predictions. The data is overwhelming. Voter ID works. It doesn't suppress votes. It increases election integrity without preventing legitimate voting. Look beyond America. Countries with voter ID, Canada requires ID, high turnout, no controversy. Mexico, strict photo ID with biometric data, high turnout, increased election legitimacy. India, over 1 billion people, voter ID required, successfully runs largest democratic elections in the world. European countries, most require ID, no suppression, no controversy. If voter ID were actually suppressive, and discriminatory? Wouldn't other democracies have discovered this? Wouldn't there be international outcry? The fact that voter ID is standard practice globally proves it's reasonable and effective. Many states provide free voter ID to address cost concerns. Show up with proof of identity and residency, get free ID for voting purposes. This eliminates any legitimate barrier. If ID is free and easily obtainable, what's the objection? Democrats still oppose it. Why? Because their objections were never genuine. Free ID doesn't solve their problem because their problem isn't cost, it's verification. Polling consistently shows overwhelming support for voter ID. 75 to 80% of Americans support voter ID requirements. This includes the majority of Democrats, overwhelming majority of independents, large majorities of Black and Hispanic voters, all age groups, all regions. Voter ID isn't controversial among actual voters. It's only controversial among Democrat politicians who benefit from weak security. This disconnect proves Democrat opposition isn't about public interest, it's about partisan advantage. In practice, voter ID accomplishes several things. It prevents impersonation fraud. Harder to vote as someone else when ID is required. Deters illegal voting. Non-citizens less likely to attempt voting when verification is required. Increases public confidence. Voters trust results more when they know security measures exist. Creates accountability. If fraud is alleged, ID requirements provide paper trail for investigation. It normalizes election security. It makes security standard practice rather than controversial. These are all positive outcomes, and they're achieved without preventing legitimate voting. Let me address why this matters. Why election integrity is essential to democracy and why we gotta fight for it. Democracy only works when citizens believe elections are fair and legitimate. When people trust that their vote counts and that results reflect voters' will. When elections lack integrity, when fraud is possible or perceived, trust collapses. People stop believing in the system. They see elections as rigged. Democracy dies. Voter ID is one component of election integrity. It's not sufficient alone, but it's necessary. It demonstrates that we care about security, that we're taking basic measures to prevent fraud. Without voter ID, elections lack credibility. People rightfully question results. How do we know non-citizens didn't vote? How do we know people didn't vote multiple times? How do we know the results are legitimate? Voter ID answers these questions. It provides baseline security that enables trust. When fraud occurs, it cancels legitimate votes. If someone votes illegally, they're nullifying the vote of a legitimate voter who voted differently. This is unjust. Legal voters shouldn't have their votes canceled by illegal votes. Citizens shouldn't be disenfranchised by non-citizens voting. People following rules shouldn't be disadvantaged by people breaking rules. Voter ID protects legitimate voters by ensuring their votes aren't diluted by fraudulent votes. Even if fraud is rare, it can swing close elections. Many elections are decided by hundreds or thousands of votes. Presidential elections in 2000, 2016, and 2020 were decided by narrow margins in key states. If fraud affects even 0.1% of votes in close states, it can change outcome of the presidential election. Senate races are often decided by 1 to 2%. State and local races by even less. Preventing even small amounts of fraud is critical to ensuring rightful winners prevail. When election security is weak, corruption increases. Politicians who know fraud is possible have incentive to engage in it. Operatives who know that they won't be caught have incentive to cheat. Strong security with measures like voter ID creates accountability. It makes fraud harder and detection easier. This deters corruption. Weak security invites corruption. We've seen this throughout history. Cities with weak election security have long histories of fraud and manipulation. Voting is the most fundamental right of citizenship. It's what distinguishes citizens from non-citizens. Citizens have the right to choose government. Non-citizens don't. When non-citizens vote because verification is weak, citizenship loses meaning. Why become a citizen if you can vote anyway? Why follow immigration law if illegal immigrants have voting rights? Voter ID helps ensure only citizens vote. This preserves meaning of citizenship and the rule of law. Let me tell you what this fight is actually about. Because it's not about ID. It's about power and the future of America. Democrats want control over elections. They want to determine who votes, how voting works, who counts votes, how votes are counted. They push mail voting, ballot harvesting, automatic registration, same-day registration, no ID requirements, minimal verification, extended counting periods. Every single one of these reduces security and increases opportunity for manipulation. That's not accident. That's the point. They want elections they can control and manipulate. Because if they control elections, they control government. If they control government, they control everything. Voter ID threatens this control. It's one security measure they can't circumvent. That's why they fight it so viciously. Democrats believe demographic changes favor them. Increasing minority populations, immigration, urban growth. These trends supposedly guarantee permanent Democrat majorities. But this only works if they can maximize turnout among their demographic groups, including illegal immigrants who shouldn't be voting. Voter ID threatens this by ensuring only eligible voters participate. Democrats need weak security to enable their demographic strategy. Voter ID undermines that strategy. This is fundamentally about whether America remains a constitutional republic with the rule of law or transforms into something else. Constitutional republics require election integrity, citizens choosing leaders, law determining eligibility, rules enforced equally, results reflecting voters' will. What Democrats want is post-constitutional democracy where rules are flexible, enforcement is selective, and results are engineered to achieve correct outcomes. Voter ID represents commitment to constitutional principles. Opposition to voter ID represents rejection of those principles. Democrats want federal control over elections. They've pushed bills like For the People Act and John Lewis Voting Rights Act that federalize elections and prohibit voter ID. They want Washington controlling how states run elections. They want to override state voter ID laws and other security measures. This is unconstitutional. Constitution gives state authority over elections. Federal government has limited role, but Democrats want federal control because they can't win state by state. Many states have implemented voter ID despite Democrat opposition. Federal control would override state reforms. This fight is about federalism and constitutional structure. The stakes are enormous. If Democrats succeed in preventing voter ID and weakening election security, elections become less trustworthy. Public confidence collapses further. Violence becomes more likely as people see elections as fraudulent. Fraud increases. Democrats manipulate results. One party control becomes permanent. America becomes California or Illinois, right large. Constitutional republic dies. Rule of law becomes meaningless. American experiment fails. That's not hyperbole. That's what's at stake. Election integrity is foundational to everything else. Voter ID is common sense. It's requiring people to prove their identity before voting. It's basic election security practiced by most democracies worldwide. It doesn't suppress votes. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't prevent legitimate voting. The data proves this conclusively. States with voter ID have high turnout, including high minority turnout. Democrats oppose voter ID because it prevents fraud that benefits them. Because it requires minimal civic competence from their voting base. Because it threatens their strategy of weakening election security to enable manipulation. Every argument they make is false. Voter ID isn't racist. Assuming minorities can't get ID is racist. It doesn't suppress turnout. The data shows otherwise. It's not unnecessary. Election integrity always matters. It's not Jim Crow. That comparison is offensive and historically illiterate. We must fight for voter ID and broader election integrity. This is about preserving democracy, about ensuring elections are legitimate, about making sure citizens choose their government rather than fraudsters manipulating results. Support voter ID laws. Push for stricter election security. Oppose Democrat efforts to weaken protections. Demand integrity in our electoral system. Leviticus 19:15 says, "You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor." This verse addresses justice in judgment. The principle is equal treatment under law regardless of status. Don't favor the poor because you sympathize with them. Don't favor the rich because you fear or admire them. Judge righteously based on truth and law. This applies directly to voting and election integrity. Justice requires equal treatment. Everyone plays by the same rules. Rich and poor alike must show ID. Powerful and powerless alike must prove eligibility. Citizens and non-citizens are distinguished by law, not ignored for political advantage. When Democrats oppose voter ID, they're showing partiality. They claim to protect the poor and minorities, but they're actually enabling injustice. They're allowing fraud that cancels legitimate votes. They're treating people unequally based on political calculation rather than applying law righteously. Righteous judgment requires election integrity. It requires rules applied equally to everyone. It requires verification that people are who they claim to be and are eligible to vote. Voter ID is a righteous policy. It treats everyone equally under the law. It prevents injustice or fraudulent votes canceling legitimate votes. It ensures that judgment in the form of election results reflects reality rather than manipulation. Opposition to voter ID is opposition to righteous judgment. It's partiality disguised as compassion. It's injustice masquerading as protection. We must demand righteousness in our elections. Equal treatment, consistent rules, verified eligibility, trustworthy results. Support voter ID. Demand election integrity. Reject lies and manipulation. Fight for righteous elections. If you found this episode helpful, please share it, like it, and subscribe so you don't miss future conversations. And if you want to support this work, consider becoming a member on Patreon at Courage in the Darkness, where you can get free merchandise and access to all my content and shows. Thank you for listening. Demand voter ID. Protect election integrity. Ensure righteous judgment. God bless. Happy New Year. I'll see you guys next year.